Welcome in. I'm really glad you're here. My name is Lindsay, and this is Lindsay Speaks. Just take a breath, settle in, and let's see what's coming through. I'm getting a very clear energy right away, like instantly. This feels like someone who has been underestimated for a long time, and not in a loud way, not in an obvious way. It's more like people looked at you and decided quietly that you weren't really paying attention, like you were just there, like you were background. I'm feeling this energy of someone assuming you were unaware, assuming you wouldn't notice what was really happening behind the scenes. And I keep seeing this image of you standing in a room while conversations are happening around you, but people think you're not really listening. They think you're distracted or too kind or too focused on keeping the peace. But the truth is, you heard everything. You saw everything. You just didn't react right away. And that's important in that I'm feeling like you were being watched more than you were being valued. That sounds strange, but sit with that for a second. It's like someone was studying how you show up, how you respond, how much you give, and they were using that information for themselves, not to support you, not to protect you, but to feel bigger, to feel important, to feel powerful in some quiet, hidden way. This doesn't feel like someone who attacked you openly. No, this was subtle. I'm getting the energy of someone smiling at you, being pleasant, maybe even acting supportive, but underneath that there was calculation, like they were gaining something from your presence, your attention, your kindness, your patience, almost like you were a mirror they used to feel better about themselves. And I feel like for a while you questioned yourself. I'm getting that very clearly. You may have thought, am I overthinking this? Or maybe I'm being too sensitive. You may have replayed conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood something. But I want to be very clear here. You weren't imagining it. You weren't crazy. You weren't reading too much into it. I'm getting that you're someone who notices patterns. You don't jump to conclusions fast. You observe first, you feel first, you let things unfold. And because of that, people sometimes assume you're passive, but you're not. You're perceptive. You're emotionally intelligent. You gather information quietly, almost without trying. I keep seeing it like puzzle pieces. One small thing didn't make sense, then another, then another. Nothing dramatic on its own, but together they started forming a picture you couldn't ignore anymore. And the interesting thing is, nothing changed about you. You didn't suddenly become suspicious or cold. The mask just couldn't stay in place anymore. I'm feeling like there were moments where something slipped. A tone, a look, a reaction that didn't match the words. Almost like someone tripped over their own act for just a second and you caught it. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Even if you try, if you've been feeling tired lately, emotionally tired, like you've been carrying something heavy without realizing how heavy it actually was, this is for you. I'm getting that deep down exhaustion that comes from being on all the time. From staying calm, from staying kind, from staying understanding, even when something didn't feel right. This feels like you've just come out of a long internal battle, not a loud one, not something everyone could see, but something that lived in your chest and your mind. Like constantly checking yourself, adjusting yourself, making sure you weren't causing problems while quietly trying to understand what was actually happening. And I'm also feeling that you didn't want to believe the worst about anyone. That's a big theme here. You gave the benefit of the doubt. You looked for explanations. You told yourself there had to be a reason. And again, that's not weakness. That's your heart. That's who you are. But there came a moment, even if it was small, where something inside you shifted. I'm getting that inner pause, that quiet moment where you thought, wait, why does this keep feeling off? And that's where everything started changing, even if nothing changed on the outside yet. If this is already resonating, drop I saw it in the comments, hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with me. I want to stay right here for a moment because the energy keeps circling back to this one theme. I'm getting it very clearly now. This wasn't love. This was attention being taken. This was validation being pulled from you, almost quietly, almost invisibly. I feel like you were being watched in a way that felt flattering at first, but it wasn't actually care. I'm seeing someone observing how you show up, how you respond, how much patience you have, how forgiving you are. It's like they were clocking your reactions, storing them away, learning what they could get away with. And the more you stayed calm, the more you stayed understanding, the more they assumed you didn't see what was happening. This feels like ego fuel, very strongly. Like your presence alone made them feel bigger. Your kindness made them feel important. Your attention made them feel chosen. I'm getting the sense that they needed you to stay in a certain position so they could keep feeling good about themselves. Not because they wanted to build with you, but because you made them feel validated just by being there. And I keep getting this image of someone looking at you almost sideways, like they were sizing you up, but not in a loving way. More like, how much can I take? Or how far can I push this? And the thing is, they really thought you wouldn't notice. They truly underestimated you. I'm feeling that they labeled you in their mind, maybe as too nice, too soft, too forgiving, too trusting. And because of that label, they assumed you weren't aware. They assumed you wouldn't question things. They assumed you'd keep giving without asking why it fell off. But that assumption was wrong. You see, I'm getting that you're not someone who reacts loudly. You don't explode, you don't confront. At the first sign of discomfort, you take things in, you feel them, you sit with them, and that's where your power actually is. You notice the imbalance long before you said anything about it. It's like being in a room where the temperature keeps changing, but no one else seems to mention it. You feel it in your body, you feel it in your chest. Something isn't right, even if everything looks fine on the surface. That's what this was like for you. I'm also feeling that there was a point where you realized they liked the version of you that stayed small, the version that didn't ask questions, the version that didn't take up too much space. And that realization hit deep because you're not someone who plays roles naturally. You had to learn how to do that to survive this dynamic. And still, even then, they thought you didn't see. They thought your silence meant ignorance. They thought your calm meant compliance, but really you were watching, you were clocking patterns, you were noticing how their behavior shifted when they thought they had control versus when they felt it slipping. I'm getting that once you started to see this clearly, it changed how you felt about everything. Not in an angry way at first, but in a sobering way, like, oh, this is what this actually is. And once that awareness landed, there was no going back. This energy is very much about being underestimated by someone who mistook your kindness for blindness. They thought you were there to serve a purpose in their story. They didn't realize you were the one quietly reading the entire situation. And that realization, even if you haven't acted on it fully yet, is already shifting things in ways they never expected. And I feel like you're someone who leads with your heart. That's the next thing coming through very strongly. This isn't something you do on purpose to impress people. It's just how you are. You naturally look for the good. You naturally try to understand where someone is coming from. You give people room to be human. And because of that, people sometimes get it twisted. I'm getting that your kindness was mistaken for weakness. Not because kindness is weak, but because the wrong people don't know how to read it properly. They only understand power in loud forms: control, manipulation, games. So when they saw you showing up honestly, openly, without hidden motives, they assumed you were easy to influence. But I want to say this very clearly because this feels important. There is no shame in trusting. There is no shame in believing people. There is no shame in giving someone the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't make you foolish. That doesn't make you naive. That means your nervous system wasn't built for constant war. I'm feeling like you didn't come into this situation trying to gain anything. You weren't plotting. You weren't calculating. You weren't keeping score. You were just being yourself. And that's exactly why this dynamic caught you off guard. Because you don't operate from manipulation. I keep hearing this phrase in my mind like, you don't move sideways, you move straight. You say what you mean, you feel what you feel, and when you care fully. You don't pretend, you don't drip feed affection, you don't play hot and cold. And to someone who lives in games, that kind of energy is confusing. I'm getting that the other person didn't know how to place you. They couldn't read you the way they read others because you weren't hiding anything. And instead of respecting that, they tried to take advantage of it. They thought, oh, they're open, they're safe, they won't hurt me. But what they really meant was, I can get away with things here. And that hurts because you weren't offering access so someone could take from you. You were offering connection. I feel like for a long time you blamed yourself for that. Like you thought, maybe I should have been colder, or maybe I should have protected myself more, or maybe I should have seen it sooner. But that self-blame doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to a world that teaches people to weaponize everything, including emotions. You trust it because that's who you are. You didn't manipulate because that's not how your mind works. You didn't assume bad intentions because you don't live in that headspace. And I'm getting that you've always believed that if you show up genuinely, others will meet you there. Most of the time, that's true. This situation was the exception, not the rule. I'm also feeling like you have a very strong internal moral compass. You don't do things just because you can. You do them because they feel right. Even when you were being mistreated, you still tried to be fair. You still tried to be understanding. You still tried to communicate. And that says a lot about your character. The thing is, people who manipulate rely on confusion. They rely on mixed signals. They rely on people second-guessing themselves. And you don't thrive in that environment. You may tolerate it for a while, but it drains you. It exhausts you. It makes you feel disconnected from yourself. And that's why this experience hits so deeply. Not because you're fragile, but because it went against your nature. It forced you to question your instincts, and that's not something you're used to doing. You usually trust yourself. You usually know where you stand. I'm getting that part of your healing here is realizing that your heart isn't the problem, your openness isn't the problem, your empathy isn't the problem. The problem was someone trying to benefit from something they didn't understand. And even now, as you're pulling back, as you're seeing things clearly, you're still not doing it with cruelty. You're doing it with clarity. There's a difference. You're not trying to punish anyone. You're just choosing not to participate in something that requires you to shrink or twist yourself. I feel like this is the moment where you start to understand that leading with your heart doesn't mean leaving your boundaries behind. It just means you're learning how to protect something valuable instead of handing it to people who don't know what to do with it. And what's really important here is that you're not becoming someone else. You're not becoming cold. You're not becoming closed off. You're becoming discerning. You're learning that not everyone gets access to the deepest parts of you, and that doesn't make you less loving. It makes you wise. This energy feels like the beginning of you trusting yourself again. Not in a guarded way, but in a grounded way. Like you're finally realizing that the way you love is rare, and it deserves to be met with respect, not used as a resource. And as this sinks in, it naturally changes how you move, how you respond, and who even has the chance to be close to you. Because once that shift happens, you start noticing things you can't unsee. That's where this goes next. I'm seeing the mask slip more than once, not in some dramatic movie scene way. It's quieter than that, almost awkward. Little moments where something didn't line up and you felt it in your body before you could explain it in words. There were inconsistencies, small ones at first, stories that didn't quite match, reactions that felt off for the situation, words that sounded right but the energy behind them didn't land. It's like someone saying all the correct things, but somehow you still walked away feeling uneasy. That uneasiness wasn't random. That was your awareness waking up. You might remember moments where you brushed it off. You told yourself you were overthinking. You gave them an out. You explained it away for them. Maybe you thought they were stressed, tired, misunderstood, wounded. You tried to be compassionate, but the thing is, these moments kept happening, one here, another there. And even though each one was small, together they started forming a pattern. I'm seeing you replaying certain interactions later on, like hours or days afterward. Something about a tone, a look, a pause that lasted just a little too long, a smile that didn't reach the eyes. It's subtle, but once you're tuned into it, it's loud. That's the mask slipping. That's the real thing peeking through before they could catch it and pull it back on. And the red flags weren't always obvious. This wasn't constant chaos. That's important. If it had been obvious cruelty, you would have left much sooner. This was mixed. Warm one moment, distant the next. Supportive when it benefited them, cold when it didn't. Apologies that sounded right but didn't lead to real change. Promises that felt good in the moment but somehow never held weight. There's also something about how they reacted. When you were strong or confident, I'm noticing that. When you were unsure, they seemed comfortable. When you needed reassurance, they stepped in. But when you stood firm, when you trusted yourself, when you didn't need approval, something shifted. That's another place where the mask slipped. You may have noticed moments where they seemed irritated by your clarity, or moments where your growth made them uncomfortable. Not openly, not directly, but in passive ways. Little comments, subtle digs, pulling back affection, changing the subject. These things didn't sit right with you, even if you couldn't fully explain why at the time. And here's the part that really matters. You didn't ignore these things because you're blind. You ignored them because you were hopeful. There's a difference. You wanted things to be real. You wanted the connection to be genuine. You wanted to believe the best version of them was the truth. But your awareness kept nudging you, quietly, patiently, over and over again. There were moments where their behavior contradicted their words, moments where their actions told a different story than the one they were trying to sell. And every time that happened, something inside you clocked it. Even if you didn't confront it, even if you didn't speak on it, you noticed. It's like watching someone switch roles mid-scene. 1 second they're kind and attentive, the next second they're dismissive or cold. Then they snap back like nothing happened. That whiplash is confusing, and it's designed to be. It keeps you questioning yourself instead of questioning them, but slowly you stopped internalizing it. Slowly you stopped assuming you were the problem. You started realizing that these weren't random mood swings, these were cracks. And cracks tell the truth eventually. You may remember moments where you felt a knot in your stomach for no clear reason, or moments where you felt tense around them even when nothing was technically wrong. Your body was reacting to something your mind hadn't fully named yet. That's not intuition being dramatic, that's intuition being precise. And what's important here is that you didn't need every answer to know something was off. You didn't need proof, you didn't need a big reveal. The accumulation of moments was enough. The repeated feeling of this doesn't align was enough. I'm also seeing that when you started pulling back emotionally, even just a little, they noticed. Not because they suddenly cared deeply, but because the dynamic changed. The mask doesn't slip as easily when someone stops feeding into the illusion. And that's when things became more obvious. You weren't imagining the red flags. You weren't being paranoid. You were finally listening to yourself instead of overriding your own signals to keep the peace. And once that started, the picture became clearer and clearer. This is the part where awareness replaces confusion, where you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, why does this keep feeling wrong? And that question alone shifts everything, even if nothing on the outside has changed yet, because from here, you're no longer guessing, you're observing. And once you see the mask for what it is, you can't go back to pretending it fits. This is where people misunderstand you the most. They think you woke up one day and suddenly changed, like something snapped overnight. But that's not what happened at all. You didn't wake up reckless or cold or detached. You pieced it together quietly, over time, in a way most people never even noticed. There was a long stretch where you stayed silent on purpose, not because you were scared and not because you didn't know what was going on. It was strategic. You were watching, you were listening, you were letting things reveal themselves without interference. You understood, maybe without even putting it into words yet, that if you spoke too soon, the truth would hide again. So you held back. You stopped reacting the way you used to. You didn't explain yourself as much. You didn't defend your feelings. You didn't rush to clear misunderstandings. And from the outside, that probably looked like distance or confusion. But internally, it was focus. You were gathering clarity. This wasn't passive silence. This was intentional quiet. You knew on some level that if you confronted everything right away, you'd be met with denial, excuses, or emotional flips. You'd be told you were misunderstanding, overreacting, or being unfair. And you didn't have the energy for that anymore. So instead, you let action speak. You let patterns repeat. You let the truth show itself without you having to pull it out. Like, that's survival intelligence. A lot of people think survival looks loud, like fighting back or drawing hard lines immediately. But sometimes survival looks like stepping back and conserving energy. It looks like choosing not to reveal how much you know until you're strong enough to stand on it. You are protecting yourself emotionally in ways you may not have even realized at the time. You stopped offering vulnerable pieces of yourself. You stopped sharing everything. You stopped making yourself fully available, not to punish anyone, but to keep yourself safe while you figured things out. And this didn't come from nowhere. This feels like something you've learned over time, maybe even earlier in life. You've been in situations before where it wasn't safe to speak freely, where honesty was used against you, where being open led to consequences instead of care. So you learn how to go quiet, how to stay alert, how to observe without exposing yourself. That's not weakness, that's intelligence shaped by experience. You may have felt like you were wearing a mask of your own during this phase, not a fake one, but a protective one. A version of yourself that stayed neutral, calm, agreeable enough to not provoke anything, while internally you were sorting through the reality of what you were dealing with. And that's hard. It takes a lot of strength to sit in that space, to know something isn't right but not act impulsively, to feel hurt but not lash out, to feel clarity forming while still playing it cool on the surface. And there were moments where you probably wanted to say something, moments where you wanted to call things out, ask direct questions, or demand honesty, but something in you said, not yet. You were waiting until your footing felt solid, until you trusted your own understanding enough not to be shaken by whatever response came back. That's self-protection. And here's the thing, people who rely on manipulation hate this phase. They thrive on reactions. They thrive on emotional responses they can twist or control. When you go quiet, when you stop feeding the dynamic, it unsettles them. They don't know where they stand anymore. You may have noticed them acting differently during this time, pushing for reactions, fishing for reassurance, trying to provoke emotion. That wasn't random. That was them sensing a shift they couldn't quite name. Meanwhile, you were becoming clearer. You started trusting your inner signals more than external explanations. You stopped needing things to be explained away. You didn't need closure conversations or confessions. You already knew enough. The truth had shown itself in the repetition, not the promises. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about winning. This was about getting yourself out intact. And what's important here is that you didn't disappear emotionally forever. You didn't shut down your heart. You simply redirected your energy inward while you rebuilt your sense of safety. You gave yourself time to understand what you were walking away from and who you were becoming without it. That's not avoidance, that's integration. You were quietly preparing for a different way of living, one where you didn't have to second guess your instincts, one where you didn't have to manage someone else's emotions at the cost of your own, one where your peace mattered more than keeping things looking okay on the surface. And by the time you were ready to move, the decision wasn't dramatic, it wasn't chaotic, it felt calm, almost inevitable, like something clicking into place. That's what happens when clarity replaces confusion. You didn't wake up overnight, you woke up slowly, carefully, with intention. And that slow awakening is exactly why this next phase of your life feels different. You're not reacting anymore, you're choosing. And once you reach that point, there's no going back to survival mode, there's only forward. And that's exactly when they panicked. The moment you pulled away, even slightly, everything shifted. Not all at once, not in a clean or honest way, but in a messy, reactive way. It's like they suddenly realized the dynamic wasn't the same anymore. You weren't as available, you weren't as responsive, you weren't feeding the same energy, and that scared them. At first, it probably came out as apologies, but not the kind that bring real change though. These were the kind that sound right on the surface, but feel hollow underneath. Quick sorries, emotional sorries, sorries wrapped in excuses. Sorries that focus more on how bad they felt than on what they actually did. You may remember thinking, this sounds sincere, but why does nothing change? That's because those apologies weren't about accountability. They were about pulling you back in, about restoring access, about getting things back to the way they were before you started seeing clearly. Some of those apologies might have come with emotion, tears, even, strong words, promises, big statements about growth or self awareness. But something still didn't land. Your body stayed tense, your chest stayed tight, and deep down you knew this wasn't repair, this was damage control. And when the apologies didn't work the way they used to, that's when the tone shifted again. This is where the victim role comes in. Suddenly, they were the ones who were hurt, the ones who were misunderstood, the ones who had been wrong. Your distance became cruelty in their story, your boundaries became punishment, your silence became an attack. You may have heard things like, I don't know what I did wrong, or you've changed, or you're being unfair. And what's wild is how convincing it can sound at first, especially to someone like you who naturally wants to be fair and understanding. But something was different. This time you didn't rush to fix it, you didn't scramble to explain yourself, you didn't collapse under the guilt the way you might have before. You could see it for what it was, a role, a reversal. They weren't taking responsibility, they were trying to flip the narrative. And when that didn't work either, when you still didn't come back the same way, the energy got sharper, more desperate. This is where the smear attempts start showing up. It might not have been obvious right away. It often isn't. Sometimes it comes as subtle comments to others, sometimes it's concern. Sometimes it's them telling their version of the story where they just happen to look like the reasonable one and you look cold, unstable, or selfish. You may have felt that shift in the air, like suddenly people were treating you differently, asking strange questions, acting distant, or maybe you just sensed that things were being said behind your back. That feeling wasn't paranoia, that was awareness. And here's the part that really matters. They didn't smear you because you're weak. They did it because they lost control of the narrative. You stepping back meant they could no longer define who you were. And that terrified them. They needed others to see you a certain way, so they wouldn't have to look at themselves. They needed to stay the good one, the wounded one, the misunderstood one, because if the truth came out, even quietly, the image would crack. You may have noticed how fast the story changed. 1 minute they're apologizing, the next minute they're the victim, the next minute they're subtly attacking your character. That inconsistency alone tells you everything you need to know. What's important is how you handled it. You didn't rush to defend yourself. You didn't jump into the mud to clear your name. You stayed grounded. You stayed quiet. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you didn't need to say it to everyone. You trusted that the truth doesn't need chasing. It reveals itself over time, and people who really know you, who really see you, don't need convincing. That restraint takes strength. It's hard not to react when you know someone is misrepresenting you. It's hard not to want to correct every lie. But you chose peace over performance. You chose integrity over noise. And that choice protected you more than any argument ever could. This phase was uncomfortable. Let's not pretend otherwise. It likely brought up fear, anger, sadness, and maybe even self-doubt. But it also confirmed something important. You were right to pull away. Because healthy connections don't punish you for having boundaries. They don't collapse when you step back. They don't require guilt, fear, or reputation damage to stay intact. The panic you saw wasn't love being lost, it was control being threatened. And the fact that you didn't fold, didn't rush back, didn't abandon yourself to fix their discomfort, that's huge, that's growth, that's self-respect taking root. From here on, the dynamic can never be what it was. Too much has been revealed, too much clarity has settled in. You're no longer operating from confusion or guilt, you're operating from truth. And once that happens, everything else, including their reactions, becomes background noise. That's when something bigger clicks into place, because this doesn't feel like a one-time situation. This feels like a pattern you're finally breaking. Not in a dramatic announcement kind of way, but in a deep internal way that changes how your life moves forward. If you're being honest with yourself, this wasn't the first time you gave too much. It wasn't the first time you tried harder than the other person. It wasn't the first time you stayed longer than you should have because you believed things could improve if you just loved a little better, understood a little more, held a little steadier. This feels like a repeated theme. Different faces, different situations, same role. You being the one who holds space, you being the one who adapts, you being the one who smooths things over, explains things away, and keeps the emotional balance so everything doesn't fall apart. And for a long time, that role felt normal to you. You might have grown up learning that love looks like effort, that connection means sacrifice, that being good means being flexible, patient, and forgiving even when it hurts. So you learned how to overgive without even realizing you were doing it. It became automatic. You gave time when you were tired. You gave understanding when you weren't being understood. You gave second chances, third chances, endless chances because you saw potential. You saw wounds. You saw what someone could be, not what they were consistently showing you. And there's nothing wrong with having that kind of heart. But there is something exhausting about living that way forever. What's different now is that you're seeing the cost. You're seeing how much energy it takes to always be the strong one, to always be the safe place, to always absorb emotional weight that was never meant to be yours. And instead of blaming yourself for being tired, you're finally questioning why you were carrying so much in the first place. This is where boundaries start forming, not as walls, but as clarity. You're realizing that giving doesn't mean draining yourself, that love doesn't require self-abandonment, that being kind doesn't mean tolerating discomfort, disrespect, or imbalance just to keep things calm. And this learning process isn't loud, it's quiet. It shows up in small choices. You don't reply right away. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't jump to fix things that aren't actually yours to fix. You pause. You check in with yourself first. That's new for you. There may be moments where this feels uncomfortable, even wrong, like you're doing something selfish, like you're letting people down. That guilt is old programming. It doesn't mean you're doing something bad. It means you're doing something different. You're breaking a cycle that rewarded you for overextending and punished you for needing rest. And here's the thing, the people who benefited most from your overgiving are the ones who will notice this change the fastest. They may call you distant, they may say you've changed, they may act confused by your boundaries. But that reaction doesn't mean your boundaries are wrong. It means the dynamic no longer works for them. You're learning that healthy relationships don't require you to prove your worth through effort. They don't make you feel anxious when you take up space. They don't collapse when you say no. This is a recalibration. You're still loving, you're still caring, you're still deeply empathetic. But now, you're selective, you're intentional, you're aware of where your energy goes and how it's returned. And that awareness is everything. And what's powerful here is that you're not forcing this change. You're not trying to be someone else. You're responding to what you've learned. You're letting experience inform your boundaries instead of ignoring it and repeating the same story again. This feels like the end of a long lesson, one that took time because you needed to fully understand it, not just intellectually, but emotionally. You needed to feel the weight of it before you could put it down. And now you are. You're choosing balance over burnout. You're choosing clarity over chaos. You're choosing yourself without guilt. And that choice ripples outward. It changes who feels comfortable around you. It changes who has access. It changes the kind of connections that even make it into your life. This isn't you becoming closed off. This is you becoming aligned. The pattern breaks not because you fought it, but because you finally saw it clearly and decided you don't need to live that way anymore. And once that decision is made, even quietly, it reshapes everything that comes next. Because your power was never loud. It was never about dominance or proving anything or making a scene. Your power has always been consistent, steady, grounded, the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience to exist, and that's why it was underestimated for so long. Like, you didn't overpower people, you outlasted confusion, you didn't argue your truth, you lived it, even when things were messy, even when you were unsure, even when you were hurt. You kept showing up as yourself. That's not flashy strength, but it's real. This is the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are at your core, even when you temporarily forget it. It comes from having a moral line you don't cross, Even when crossing, it would be easier. You didn't become cruel just because someone else was. You didn't lie just because you were lied to. You didn't manipulate just because it was done to you. That's moral clarity. You knew what felt wrong long before you could explain it. You knew what crossed a line long before you named it. And even when you were doubting yourself, there was something inside you that refused to fully bend. You might have adapted, you might have gone quiet, but you didn't lose yourself. And that matters more than you realize, because self-respect doesn't always look like confidence in the moment. Sometimes it looks like endurance, sometimes it looks like restraint, sometimes it looks like choosing not to respond, not to escalate, not to become someone you don't recognize just to feel powerful. And that's what you did. You held on to your integrity when it would have been easy to drop it. And now, that integrity is what's carrying you forward. You don't have to convince anyone who you are. You don't have to explain yourself into being understood. Your energy speaks differently now. And this is where things start shifting in a way you can actually feel. You're stepping back into yourself. Not the version of you that was bracing all the time. Not the version of you that was constantly managing other people's emotions. But the version of you that feels grounded in your own body again. The version that trusts their instincts without second-guessing every thought. Confidence starts returning, but it's quieter than you might expect. It's not loud self-assurance, it's calm certainty. It's making decisions without needing approval. It's saying no without a long explanation. It's not feeling guilty for choosing peace. You may notice you're less reactive, less anxious, less pulled in different directions. Things that used to trigger you don't have the same grip anymore. Not because you're numb, but because you're centered. And with that shift, different people start showing up. Supportive people, steady people, people who don't need you to perform or prove yourself. People who don't drain you. People who respect your boundaries without questioning them. These connections feel easier, lighter, there's less tension, less guessing. You don't feel like you're walking on eggshells anymore. There's also a sense of emotional freedom returning, like you can breathe again, like you don't have to monitor every word or mood, like you're allowed to exist without being managed or misunderstood. This freedom isn't dramatic, it's subtle, but it's deep. It shows up when you realize you're no longer replaying conversations in your head, when you notice you're sleeping better, when your body feels less tight, when you're not bracing for something to go wrong, when you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. And what's powerful is that this didn't come from forcing confidence. It came from reclaiming yourself piece by piece, from honoring your values, from choosing self-respect over self-betrayal over and over again. You didn't become powerful by becoming louder. You became powerful by becoming aligned. And now you don't need to chase validation or closure or justice. You're already standing in it. Your life feels more honest, more spacious, more yours. This is the part where things start to feel different in a way you can't fully explain to others, but you feel it deeply. Like you're finally moving in the right direction, even if you don't have all the answers yet. You're not trying to go back to who you were before everything happened. You're stepping into who you were always becoming. And from here, what comes next isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about continuing to choose yourself consistently without apology. And this is where it settles. You didn't lose anything by walking away. You reclaimed yourself. The confusion is gone. The noise is quiet. You're standing in truth now, and that's why everything feels lighter. This isn't an ending. This is you finally coming home to yourself.